it's a real pleasure to be able to speak to you this afternoon about the Master of Public and Social Policy. As Andrew said, I am a program convener, and also as an academic member of staff, I teach into the program. Now, we just have, the screen is just frozen here. So what I'm going to do is to stop share at the moment and then get back into the okay, this should work now. Okay. Wonderful. Okay, so now I think we're set to go. Great. Now, so I also teach into the program, and I also do various research on child and youth related policy, including studies on institutional child abuse, and also a large study on children's wellbeing from a global perspective, which both have policy related dimensions, and happy to talk about those later as part of a Q&A if you like. But the staff who teach into the Master of Public and Social Policy all have policy expertise, and they come from a range of academic and also industry backgrounds. And this really informs the degree program. So the major issues facing Australia today and into the future, and really for that matter, the world of the future, all have a social dimension. And this is the case for issues such as poverty or food security or climate change or inequalities or healthcare, education, economic crisis or population aging. And so what the Masters of Public and Social Policy equips students to do is to find solutions to the major challenges that we are confronting today. And it does this by developing skills to make sense of the world through critical inquiry. And specifically, it does this through this dual focus of developing applied social research skills and also to develop policy analysis skills. So this means that the Masters of Public and Social Policy essentially assist you through the social research skills to gather evidence and knowledge and information about the problems that we're confronting. But not only does it do that through the policy analysis skills, these allow you as a graduate of the degree program to make the best kinds of decisions on the basis of the best available data. So that means that you are able to gather information, critically evaluate that information, but also, and really importantly, apply that knowledge to basically make good informed decisions as a decision maker, and also to guide decision makers. And I think now more than ever, we need people who can address the complex challenges we face as a society. And the Masters of Public and Social Policy is designed to produce graduates with the capabilities to do so. So the degree will give you a deep understanding of the forces that shape policy and also the processes involved in making policy. And so therefore you'll develop really advanced skills in critical analysis to help you design and deliver effective policy solutions, essentially in the public interest, as well as the confidence to make socially informed judgments. Now I'll talk a little bit about the degree structure in the moment in more detail, but it essentially involves 8 core units that can be undertaken in 12 months. Okay, so this is frozen again, so you have to bear with me. I'm going to have to stop sharing my screen for some reason, and then I will get back into the presentation. My apologies. Okay, now, essentially what the Masters of Public and Social Policy equips you to be is it develops your skills as a social scientist and a policymaker, and that's to help you understand and develop solutions to contemporary social problems. And so I've created this montage here, which is illustrative of the kind of approach social scientists take, which are developed in the degree program. So the top left image is of some philosophers. And I've included this because in the Master of Public and Social Policy, we discuss questions about how we can justify our claims and also what counts as evidence. And so in seeking to engage and to understand the social world, social scientists often ask some of the big questions. Things like, what is a good society? What might we eradicate poverty? How can we make the world a better place? And it's often in asking the right questions in the first place that then we can make the right decisions. It's often more difficult to even think about what might be the best solutions unless we can ask the right kinds of questions. And we do that through equipping students with critical inquiry skills and also knowledge of substantive policy issues. What social scientists do also, however, is attempt to gather useful and valid knowledge and also to inform the community about I suppose, the veracity and the credibility of different sources of knowledge. And we see this as especially critical now where there are claims of fake news and contestation over kinds of knowledge and also strategies of misinformation and disinformation, which are often distributed by very powerful political actors. So one of the roles of social scientists is to contribute to the stock of more certain forms of knowledge so that others, including decision makers, can base their decisions on more certain knowledge. So if we go back to this montage here, I've included the line graph and also that image of the people with the speech bubbles. And essentially, these illustrate the types of tools that you will learn to create knowledge. And these are quantitative social research skills and qualitative social research skills. So quantitative social research skills are what people most often think about in terms of, say, social statistics. Now, and these often typically involve collecting numerical data from a large number of people so that we can predict patterns of, say, attitudes or behaviours that exist within a society. Now, qualitative methods typically involve studying the meanings, perceptions, and understandings of people and ask them to say, well, how do they experience a particular situation? So it often entails talking to people in depth about the social world. Now, very few people have skills that are of both quantitative and qualitative social research. And this is what you also learn in the degree. And so by combining these two skills, it gives you a set of very, very powerful tools. So for example, by combining qualitative and quantitative research skills, we could predict with a great degree of confidence whether members of a local community might support the introduction of sustainable development initiatives that might be being proposed by the local council. And this is a very real world situation that many of our graduates actually work with and are exposed to. And so quantitatively, we might run a survey, but we might also look at other factors within the community, things like the unemployment rate, the degree of car ownership, the highest level of education within the community. And on that basis, we could potentially predict whether a community might support the initiatives or not. But to find out whether the reasons why people would support, say, climate sustainability initiatives in the local community, we would have to ask them more directly. All right, and also this might be one of the reasons that we could possibly help influence a decision. So in that way, the qualitative social research skills will be used, for example, focus groups or in-depth interviews. So combining those two sources of knowledge together provides a really powerful set of tools for inquiry to help decision making. And that's really one of the critical elements of the Masters of Public and Social Policy. Okay, so if we go back to the montage, the map of New South Wales is essentially a pattern of rates of inequality and disadvantage across New South Wales. And so this map charts things like the proportion of the population who are unemployed, who don't finish high school, who have low family income, and so on. Now, as social scientists, we might seek to look at the distribution of individual opportunities and capabilities, or examine what particular groups have, right? And so we might be interested, for example, in then addressing some of these inequalities or thinking about what the ramifications of these inequalities are, for example, health outcomes for different groups. So, for example, we think about the different inequalities around us. How can we explain them? Is it because of hard work or of individual differences, good luck, or being born into the right or wrong family? So as policy scientists and as social scientists, we're often concerned about this distribution of resources. So the picture in the bottom right corner is also related to this. And it's also related to the distribution of life chances. It's a picture of people involved in the Black Lives Matter movement. Now, for example, if we think about the protests and riots that have occurred following the killing of George Floyd in Minneapolis last week, social scientists would consider the changes that need to be made to, for example, policing practices. But we would also consider how the events occurring across the United States and now also in other parts of the world are related to other underlying factors that need to be addressed. For example, generational race relations or long-term unemployment and cultures around policing. So it's making those kinds of connections through not only the way that we think about decisions, but also through social research skills that the Masters of Public and Social Policy allows us to do. That's what social scientists do. We make connections that allow us to address not only the symptoms of a problem, but also its causes. Now, the last image that I've included on this montage is the McDonald's logo. And I've included this because it indicates the emphasis on globalization that we have in the degree program. So we live in a globalized world, and as social scientists, we need to understand how the local, the national, and the global are essentially interrelated and also distinct. So the Masters of Public and Social Policy emphasizes how political processes that seem to be occurring in very, very different parts of the world might actually affect us in a very intimate and personal way. Okay, let's hope this moves on now. So again, the slide is frozen, so my apologies. I'm going to have to stop sharing the screen so that I can move on to the next slide. Okay, so now what the next two slides are essentially kinds of tasters of the kinds of activities that we might expose students to. And I'll talk about the subjects in a little bit more detail in a moment. Now, I think you can think about this, yourself or ask questions about which we might discuss later on via the chat function. But this is a kind of scenario that you might be exposed to as a graduate of the Masters of Public and Social Policy if you work in a policy advisor role. And so in this scenario, we might work through what is at stake in the scenario, why certain actors, political actors, may have certain interests to, in this case, change the law. So in this case, you're imagining that you're a senior policy advisor to the Minister for Health, which is actually quite a feasible position that some of our graduates might actually end up in. And so the Minister for Health is concerned about rates of childhood obesity. And they're concerned that children's increasing use of digital technologies, including mobile phones, might be behind the increasing rates of obesity levels. And so one response to that the minister might want to introduce is to ban children using mobile phones under the age of 16 years. And the minister wants to model laws prohibiting the sale of mobile phones on the sale and consumption of alcohol to minors So this would then mean, for example, that it would explicitly prohibit parents signing phone contracts with telecommunication providers for phones to be used by individuals under 16 years of age. It also would prohibit the direct sale of mobile phones to children under 16 years, regardless of whether their parent provides consent or not, with a range of penalties associated with those behaviours. Now, whilst this is only a kind of a scenario, not a real life scenario, I mean, something along these lines could actually be introduced, maybe not at this extreme level. So you as students would think through, well, okay, what is the evidence that links mobile phone use to, for example, obesity rates? Is that a plausible connection? And, and on that basis, would you support the minister or not? Even if it is a plausible connection, what might be some of the other unforeseen consequences for introducing this kind of restriction? Would it have other adverse or perverse effects that the minister might not necessarily consider? If you wanted to support the laws through, who within the community would be opposing the introduction of these laws and who would be in support of them? How would you countenance some of the arguments against the proposal of the laws, including, for example, changing the laws? And also, how might you then build coalitions with other interested and important actors to pass the law? Now, these are all the kinds of skills that we actually get students who are enrolled in the Masters of Public and Social Policy to think about. So here we can see that there'll be a connection between looking at the empirical evidence and also interpreting that evidence within a broader political and policy context. In this case, to bring about what would be a radical change. You might also be able to influence the minister not to go through these laws. Okay, another scenario, and this is a shorter one, is really just about basic data analysis and interpretation. Now, one of the things that we teach students is data literacy. So, and essentially by being able to interpret the veracity, the credibility of data and of evidence, you can then use it to essentially, as I said before, inform decision makers to make better decisions. Now, this is an interesting scenario here. What this graph illustrates here is the relationship between the murder rate in Florida and the consumption of ice cream in Florida. And it shows a particular kind of relationship. So what we would do in this scenario is to work through, well, what does the graph actually tell us? What is the relationship that this graph potentially indicates between the murder rate and consumption of ice cream? On that basis, what conclusions could you draw from this graph? Are they valid? Are they spurious, right? And what alternative explanations might account for the relationship between the two? So we would work through these kinds of scenarios, and that would be quite a simple one, I think, to work out. Okay. Now, let me talk a little bit more about the program. We can talk about the entry requirements in more detail, perhaps in the Q&A, but essentially there are several pathways into the program, but it essentially requires you to have some recognised undergraduate qualification, either at an honours level or a graduate diploma level, or at a bachelor's level with some other conditions. Now, the course consists of 8 core units, but everyone has to undertake for the degree, and they are a mix of those which focus more on policy processes and decision making, and those which are really about research and gathering evidence to make decisions, right? So there's a balance between the two, which, as I said, illustrates this dual focus that really we think and we know graduates who into a future need. So let me briefly go through the units so that you get a sense of what you'll study in the degree. Okay, so Advanced Introduction to Policy essentially focuses on how policy is made and who makes it. So it introduces students to the policy process, the role of the state and other social actors that influence policy, who fight over policy or who might collaborate in policy making. So it's an advanced introduction. Policy Ideas in Focus gives students an understanding of state-of-the-art policy innovation. So what are the cutting edge innovations that are occurring in the policy world at the moment? So it could be, for example, the influence of the brain and mind sciences on policy making, the use of big data in policy making and to inform decisions. Or it could be, say, nudge theory, which comes from behavioral economics, and that's the use of positive reinforcement and indirect suggestion to bring about social change. So these are areas that students might learn about in the course, and of course they are continuously updated depending on what the innovations are. So policy design concepts and case studies essentially involve students simulating a real policy making environment. So you work on particular policy case studies in a small team, right? And you work on a range of problem definitions and scenarios. You consider alternative policy solutions to a particular area. And essentially you also engage with experts and stakeholders in a given policy area. And this could be, for example, case studies on refugee and migration policy or on climate change policy. So essentially the focus there is on real hands-on kinds of policy work. So it gives you a real kind of taste and experience of real life policy scenarios and situations. And then the fourth of the more policy-oriented units is making public policy in a globalized world. And this examines how policies that are made are kind of entwined at both the national and international contexts. And it considers international and domestic institutions and actors. And this is more important than it ever has been, because policy ideas are not only local, but they also kind of are exchanged and flow around the world, because time and space is actually much easier to traverse now. And so we can see this, that events that are occurring in other parts of the world may impact on Australia almost immediately. And so it's about trying to think about how we can think of also local solutions within the global contexts. Now, the units that have a more methods focus include social impact assessment. And this is where you learn about a particular kind of methodology called social impact assessment, which is a very in-demand methodology for all levels of government, in particular to assist with planning decisions. So you learn how to determine what impacts a decision that an organisation might make might have on a particular community. So in that sense, it's very predictive. And that very much complements the Evaluating Social Policy course, which teaches you how to conduct evaluations. And this is one of the most, one of the most useful forms of applied social research that we have. So you use research methods to assess whether a policy or a program or a service is meeting its desired outcomes, that is, it's effective according to desired criteria. So essentially, you find while social impact assessment is about predicting the impacts of something, evaluation gives you the skills to learn whether something is working or not, and therefore potentially to change it. Now, doing social survey research is about those quantitative social research skills. So for example, you learn how to design a social survey, the appropriate principles of random sampling, and also you learn how to do statistical analysis. Now, no prior knowledge in mathematics is required. It's really about applied social statistics, which are very, very powerful and can be used to predict certain outcomes as well. So very powerful tools. And then qualitative methods, which is a course that I teach, is about developing skills to go about designing qualitative studies, collect qualitative data, which is essentially about observation or focus groups or interviews, and then apply that knowledge, which is often about stories and experiences, within a policy-making context. And it goes through the whole process, how you design a study, through how you analyze qualitative data, and also there's an emphasis on running consultations in this course, and then also qualitative writing for policy. So how can you use qualitative data to convince decision makers? Okay, so by the end of this course, all these courses, you're not only an expert consumer of knowledge, which many graduates from other degrees are, but you have also both a theoretical and applied knowledge and also a real world experience in also producing and applying knowledge. And that is really, really powerful. Okay, so what can you do with the Masters of Public and Social Policy? Now, if you do a degree in nursing, well, then you're pretty much qualified to be a nurse, and that's really important. Or if you do a degree in optometry, you are an optometrist. But if you do a Masters of Public and Social Policy, you're qualified for a range of positions. And this is because this Masters emphasizes a core set of skills which are applicable to a broad range of vocational areas and occupations. Now, in terms of graduate outcomes, so the data from the most recent graduate surveys, the Graduate Careers Australia survey from 2019, showed that for those students who are social science postgraduate coursework degree graduates, when they left, like the year after, approximately 90% of them were employed, right? And approximately 84% in a full-time position. And the median starting salary, once they graduated, was approximately $80,000 per year, which of course, if you develop a policy career, that increases. Now, career opportunities for our graduates are very diverse, and they include a whole range of things like working in community development, as an educator, as an evaluator, working for the government or the private sector as a consultant, working in human resources, doing international aid work, working as a journalist, working in market or social research, as well as things like being a policy analyst or a town planner or a welfare officer. There's a whole range of positions which our graduates are working in as a result of undertaking the degree. And similarly, the kinds of employers our graduates work for are also very diverse, and they, include, but are not limited to, different advocacy organisations, governments at all different levels, local, state and national, for overseas aid organisations, and also for some of these large international non-government organisations as well. They work, as I said, for corporate businesses and consultancy firms, also for non-government organisations in the social, community and human services sectors, and as well as places like social research and marketing firms, and importantly at the moment, trade unions. So we have graduates working in all of these kinds of organisations and for all of these kinds of employers. Okay, so let me finish up my talk before we go into the Q&A session. By really summing up why a Masters of Public and Social Policy is a really good option for you to undertake as a graduate degree. It qualifies you with a set of skills that are highly adaptable. In particular, the degree emphasises abilities to research, adapt, and apply knowledge. And this gives Masters of Public and Social Policy graduates a real advantage, because in the near future, jobs that exist now will no longer exist, and others will have been created but we don't even know of yet. And even within existing jobs, the way of doing things may alter dramatically. So given this, there'll be more and more reliance upon people who have the skills to critically analyze information, to create information, and to direct others in its use. And ultimately, we need people equipped to ask critical questions about how the social world functions and why things are the way they are. And also, and importantly, to develop solutions to a range of problems. And the Masters of Public and Social Policy is perfect for this.